Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen, wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in, amma ba'd. Our first question for today, Sister Shamima emails and asks that my father passed away and I wanted to attend his funeral and also go to his actual janazah, but then I was told that it is haram for a lady to go to the funerals and to attend the janazah. Can you please shed some light on this issue? So that is our first question. So we begin by stating that the general rule is that any ruling that comes in our Sharia applies to both genders unless we find explicit evidence that this is a gender-specific issue. And when it comes to the janazah, it is well known that in early Islam, our Prophet ﷺ initially forbade people from visiting the graveyards. And then he asked Allah's permission to visit his mother's grave, Amina. And then he said that I used to forbid you from visiting graveyards. Then Allah allowed me to visit my mother's grave. So now I am telling you, go and visit graves because it reminds you of the akhirah. So this is a generic ruling right now. Both men and women, that right now we say it is generic. And there's another hadith as well, the famous hadith of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anh, that whoever follows the janazah of a Muslim with iman and expecting Allah's reward, that person who continues until there is going to be a dafn, the person will come back with 2 mountains of good deeds. And each of these mountains is like the Mount of Uhud. So whoever follows in janazah until the burial takes place and then comes back will get the reward of 2 large mountains. This is a general rule that as of yet would apply to both. But there are a number of traditions in which women are specifically mentioned. So we need to examine these. The most authentic, which is in Bukhari and Muslim, and the most explicit, and essentially this will be my verdict because it is very clear. In Sahih Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, Atiyya, one of the famous Sahabiyat, she said, Nuhina an ittiba'il janaizi walam yu'zam alayna. This is in Bukhari and Muslim. We were forbidden, we meaning the women folk, we were forbidden from following the janazah, but at the same time, it wasn't made a strict issue. وَلَمْ يُعْزَمْ عَلَيْنَا. We weren't told to do so in a very strict manner. The general rule we were told not to follow, but it wasn't enforced. It was something that we weren't told is a very severe thing. This hadith is in Bukhari and Muslim. And there are a number of traditions in which scholars have differed over the authenticity. The next hadith that we'll do is in Abu Dawood, and scholars have differed. Is it Hasan, is it Da'if? That the Prophet ﷺ is reported to have said, لَعْنَ اللَّهُ زَائِرَاتُ الْقُبُورِ, and in one version, زَوَّارَاتُ الْقُبُورِ. Allah's la'na is upon the females who visit or who frequently visit the graves and who put candles on it. وَالْمُتَّخِذِينَ عَلَيْهِ سُرَجٍ, and those who put candles on the graves. So there's a discussion, is this hadith authentic or not? And those who make it authentic, then they divide into 2 camps. Is the meaning those ladies who do jahili practices and they bring the candles to the grave? Or is the meaning those ladies who merely visit the graves? So there's yet another level of meaning now. What is the meaning of this hadith? Those ladies who go and they will do, because in the days of Jahiliyyah, you know, it is instilled, I think in the Chinese culture, or the Japanese culture, that when somebody dies, they hire professional mourners. Do you know of this thing? That they hire professional mourners. And the mourners will come and they will cry out in a professional manner. And they will evoke the emotions of the people. You know, it is human nature. When everybody is crying, you will feel sad. When everybody's nervous, you will feel nervous. When everybody's happy, you will feel happy. So the purpose of these mourners is to bring about an atmosphere of wailing and sadness. And the Jahili Arabs had this practice, well known. And that's why there are so many ahadith that are forbidding this. So the question, does this hadith follow the same genre that what is being forbidden is those ladies? Or, because the phrase says, those ladies who visit graves and put candles on it. So they would go and they would surround the grave and they would put candles and do various things. So what is being forbidden? Ladies visiting or the Jahili custom of hiring out those professional mourners, and they will wail and they will do a particular type of chanting and whatnot. What is being forbidden? That is another issue as well. And then there's a hadith that is definitely weak. So this one in Abu Dawood is a controversy. Some have made it hasan, some have made it da'if. And then the third hadith, which is definitely weak, which is in Ibn Majah, that it is narrated that our Prophet saw some women coming back from a janazah, and he said to the ladies, "Did you carry the janazah?" They said, "No." Then he said, "Did you shroud the janazah?" They said, "No." He said, "Did you put it in the ground and bury it?" I mean, did you do any of the physical labor, what that men do? Men carry it, men shroud it, men put it in, men dig the grave, men do. So he's asking them one by one. They said, "No, no, no." And then he said, "Then you have come back carrying evil, not carrying good deeds." Okay? And this hadith is very clearly weak, and also even the wording that the Prophet is not the nature of the hadith to put down in such a harsh manner when they, so anyway, the isnad is weak in any case. So these are the three main hadith in this regard. Based on these three, our four madhabs then extracted from these hadith. And the madhab that was the most willing for the women to go to the janaiz was the Maliki madhab. Essentially, the Maliki madhab considered these ahadith to indicate only those women who are doing un-Islamic practices, i.e. the wailing and the shouting and they had a type of, I'm not going to call it poetry, but they had phrases they would say, okay? So for example, "This is the biggest calamity, how will we live after this? Who will take care of us? Our rock has disappeared." So they have phrases. These phrases are phrases of Jahiliyyah. So they had this professional means of doing it, and especially it was something the women did, and it was associated with feminine mourning of the graves. Men did not do this, it is the women that did it. So the Malikis understood all of this applies to that category of ladies, not to ladies, full stop. And so essentially, As-Sawi in his book, the interpretation of Muwatta Imam Malik, Hashiyat As-Sawi it's called, he says that it is jaiz, it is allowed for an elderly lady without any conditions to go attend the janazah, and it is jaiz for a young lady to go if she is appropriately dressed and the janazah is of her close relative. Okay? Now remember, in that society, young ladies did not exit the house at all except for a reason. So the Maliki madhab is saying this is one of those reasons where she's allowed to go. If her brother, if her father, if her uncle passes away, then she can go as long as she observes Islamic etiquette in her libas and also in what she says and does. Okay, this is the Maliki madhab. They are on one side. Smack in the middle is the Hanbali and the Shafi'i madhab. Both the Hanbalis and Shafi'is, they said that it is not haram, but neither is it jaiz, it is makruh. And makruh means it's best not to do. But if you do it, you are not sinful. Okay? This is the position of the Hanbalis and of the, which one? Shafi'is. This is the explicit position. Imam al-Nawawi says that, Imam al-Nawawi says in his Majmu' that what we mentioned, that it is makruh for the women to follow the janaiz, this is our madhab and the madhab of the vast majority of ulama. Ibn al-Mundhir said this is the position of Ibn Mas'ud, of Ibn Umar, of Abu Umama, of Aisha, of Masruq, of Hassan al-Basri, al-Naqai, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, Ishaq ibn Rahway, al-Thawri, al-Awza'i, so on and so forth. And Imam al-Qurtubi, the famous scholar from Cordova, Spain, Andalus, Imam al-Qurtubi said, the explicit hadith of Atiyya clearly shows that it is merely discouraged and not haram, and this is the vast majority of our ulama. This is Al-Qurtubi says, okay? The hadith of Atiyya is which one? We were told not to follow the janaiz, but we weren't told in a strict way. It wasn't enforced. It wasn't something that was made a big deal of if people did. So, the strictest in this regard is of course the one madhab that is left, and it is the Hanafi madhab. And the Hanafi madhab, they did not make it haram, but they said it is makruh karaha tahrimi, not karaha tanzihi. The Hanafis have two types of makruh, right? The other madhabs have one type of makruh. I mentioned this in an earlier Q&A that I did. The Hanafis have two types of makruh. One in which there is a small amount of sin, one in which there is no sin. Okay? So makruh karaha tanzihi, there's no sin. Makruh karaha tahrimi, there's an amount of sin, but not like sin going to Jahannam. That's haram stuff. That's like the big stuff, right? And the Hanafi categorization is actually more sensible, as I said before. Nonetheless, they said this is makruh karaha tahrimi, that there shall be an amount of sin, but not a large amount of sin. Like basically, it's not good, and really she should not go. And if she goes, then she has committed a minor sin. This is the Hanafi position. And that's why in our cultures of India, Pakistan, and other Hanafi cultures, basically it is unheard of or unknown that the women go. But in Arab and other cultures, it is not as strict of an issue in many Arab cultures because of the madhab issue. Also, there are other narrations as well that the other scholars use. Of them, the hadith in Sahih Bukhari, that the Prophet ﷺ was walking and he saw a lady sitting at a qabr crying. Okay? And it is very clear, by the way, because at that time frame, the only qabr they had was Baqi'. Okay? So the lady is sitting there at the qabr crying, not wailing. Big difference. Crying is halal. Crying, no sin. Wailing, what is wailing? To raise your voice and to say phrases of jahiliyyah and to beat oneself, this is what is haram. But to cry and to feel sad is completely not only halal, it's a sign of humanity. So he passed by a lady, hadith is in Bukhari, she's sitting at the qabr, and it was the qabr of her husband or the one who was to take care of her, and she's crying. And the Prophet ﷺ said, "O servant of Allah, female servant of Allah, be patient. Be patient and expect Allah to reward you." He gave her words of what? Encouragement. Had it been haram, had it been sinful, then he would not have said this. She did not recognize him, and she said, "You don't know what I have suffered. You don't know who this, the level of whatnot, And she said something very harsh. "Go away from here. Ilayka anni." And the Prophet, in his adab, he left. And one of the Sahaba later said, "Don't you know what did you just say? Do you know who this person was?" She didn't recognize because she was in her grief, So then she rushed up. She said, "Ya Rasulullah, I didn't recognize you. Ya Rasulullah, I'm sorry, I didn't recognize you." And the Prophet did not get angry, but he said a very powerful phrase. What is the phrase? إِنَّمَا الصَّبْرُ عِنْدَ الصَّدْمَةِ الْأُولَى. Patience is demonstrated at the first stroke of calamity. How you react when you first hear the news, how you react in the first few minutes and half hour, that shows patience. Everybody calms down in a week. Everybody. How you react as soon as you hear the news. Meaning, he's saying in a very gentle manner, you weren't patient. That's what he was telling the lady. But the point is, very clearly, she's sitting at the qabr. And he's giving her words of encouragement. Also, more explicit than this and much more powerful, in multiple narrations, we know that Aisha radiallahu anha, after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, she of course remained in her house completely. She never exited the house because of the verses of hijab that were extra upon the Prophet ﷺ. However, she wanted to go for Hajj, so she asked permission from Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anh. And so that year, all of the wives, except for one, listen to my lectures, otherwise the Prophet went over all of this, all of the wives, they went for Hajj in a special caravan, in a special entourage, with special guards that are going to take them for Hajj. And on the way back, it is narrated in multiple texts, without a question, this is authentic, she went to the grave of her brother, Abdurrahman ibn Abi Bakr. He was buried outside of Mecca. And so she went there and she walked to the grave and she made dua for her brother. And I'll quote you one of these narrations that Abdullah ibn Abi Mulaika says that Aisha came back one day from the graveyard and I said, "O al-Mu'mineen, where did you go?" She said, "I came back from the qabr of my brother Abdurrahman ibn Abi Bakr." Abdurrahman is the brother who took her for Umrah after Hajj. If you remember Masjid Aisha, Tan'im, right? Her brother Abdurrahman was the one who took her and then took her back. That was Abdurrahman ibn Abi Bakr. And he passed away in the Khilafah of, I think, Umar radiallahu anh. And so, Ibn Abi Mulaika says, didn't the Prophet ﷺ forbid women from visiting qabr? This is a very explicit hadith. Didn't the Prophet ﷺ say you're not supposed to go? And Aisha says, yes, we used to be forbidden and then he allowed us to visit. Okay? And this hadith is in Bayhaqi and Hakim. Yes, it used to be forbidden, then he allowed us. And in another version, when she visited the grave, she made dua. She stood at the grave, she made dua for her brother, and then she said, if I had been here to witness your burial, I wouldn't have come to your grave. Meaning, the point is, I don't want to be out of my house. I would go to the Kaaba and come back. But I wasn't witnessing, I wasn't there when you were lowered. I wasn't there to pray janazah over you. I was in Medina. So if I had witnessed your janazah, I wouldn't have done this detour. And I would have gone straight home. Okay? So the point is that, she went there. Now, other scholars respond and they say, the fact that Aisha radiallahu anha went, that's her opinion. And the ahadith of the Prophet are there. To which we respond, technically that's a valid point. But the opinion of Aisha is no joke, especially in feminine matters. And she knows feminine fiqh better than other later interpreters. Others say that she didn't actually visit the grave of her qabr of her brother, but it happened to be next to the road. And the response is, this is an assumption that has no basis, number one. Number two, there is no qabr that is literally on the road that you're going there. There is a small graveyard wherever there was. And the point is, she herself explicitly says, if I had witnessed your janazah, I wouldn't have come here, which means she's going out of her way. Why? Because those who say that it is not allowed, they say, we must interpret that Aisha didn't go visit the grave was on her path. You see the difference, right? And they say, if you're walking and there's a grave there, you're not visiting. And this is a stretch, can you imagine the qabr is right next to when she's walking between Makkah and Medina. She's going to the small little village that he passed away. There's a qabr there. And the wording is clear, that I have come here because I wasn't able to witness your janazah. So this doesn't hold much weight. And then they say, those that say that it is not allowed, they say that the very fact that she says, had I witnessed your janazah, I wouldn't have come, shows she knew that the default is that women should not come to the graves. You understand where they're coming from? Right? Do you understand this point? The very fact that she's saying, had I witnessed your janazah, I wouldn't have come. It means she knows women should not come to the graveyards. To respond to this, two things. Number one, if it was haram, even if she didn't witness the janazah, would she be able to come? If it were sinful, would she publicize that I'm with? So this actually proves that it is not haram at all, because she's announcing it. And number two, you are assuming she's not going to the grave because of the prohibition of women, but there's another more explicit assumption, that she doesn't want to go to the grave because she's supposed to be in hijab, which is explicit in the Quran. Right? That Allah explicitly in the Quran that remain in your hijab, remain in your houses and don't go out. So she only exited for Hajj, and it could easily be interpreted that if I had witnessed your janazah, I would have rushed straight back and I would not have done the detour because I want to get back to my house. Not because of the prohibition, but because she wants to be in her house, which is the wives of the Prophet. So to summarize this question, then we move on to the second one. It is clear, those who wish to follow the Hanafi madhab, no problem. It is makruh, karaha, tahrimi, and I respect, as you know my position, I have no problem. I think it's good if somebody follows their madhab, no problem with that. That having been said, we also have to be very sensitive that times have changed. And our women are no longer sitting at home as they did for much of Islamic history. And what is happening is that we are depriving them of the most essential places they need to be, like the Masjid, for example, right? It is true, some scholars of the past said, let the women stay at home when women would stay at home. And they said no need for them to come to the Masjid, even though the hadith is clear she should come if she wants to. But there are some madhabs that said that. But in a society and at a place and time where our wives, our daughters, our mothers are, and I'm not saying this is positive, I'm just giving it factually, they go everywhere, like as if there is nothing in exiting the house. The notion of remaining in the house is not even known to them. It is gone from the minds of our women. And I'm not saying that as a good thing or as a bad thing. I'm simply saying it as a fact, that notion is gone. To bring up these issues and then say, yeah, go ahead, do your shopping, go Kroger's, do your education. No, they should do education, don't get me wrong here. I'm just saying, go everywhere, but don't come to the masjid. Do everything. When your father dies, don't go to the qabr. You see, in this society and in this mindset, if we keep on pushing them into a corner, the reaction might be an illegitimate anger in which they say, khalas, we're going to take over, give the khutbah from now on. Okay? I was in Los Angeles on the weekend, and there's a masjid there that is only women. No men are allowed inside. Khutbah is given by the women, all run by the women. Everything is there. Now, I'm not criticizing publicly. I'm definitely not endorsing. But I will say one thing. If you keep on pushing, what's going to happen? So my philosophy, and I'll be very explicit about this, where the Sharia allows some leeway, give that leeway. Where the Sharia has some breathing room, then alhamdulillah, give. And where the Sharia has a red line, that is where we need to enforce. Because if you want to keep on moving the red line back, don't be surprised. In our time frame, to tell a daughter that she cannot go to the janazah of her father, she will literally say, what type of religion is that? I can't even come and be and whatnot. Which we should say, look, men and women are allowed to go, but there must be proper decorum. You observe the etiquettes. No wailing, no screaming, no shouting. And if there is a fear that might happen, then we tell this lady, think twice. And if you insist on going, we will have other ladies there that if that happens, you will be, taken out, that this is not appropriate, that at a wedding, and by the way, at a funeral, by the way, this is something that I have witnessed myself. So it's not just hearsay, that women are not told this and they attend the janazah, and especially if it's a sudden death, right? And you have, a young lady screaming at the top of her lungs, just bawling and saying things that are not appropriate to be said. It's not something that of Islam that you say, how are we going to live now? Who's going to take care of me? Allah took care of you, not this man. Allah took care of you, not your husband or brother or father. But at that emotional state, if you say something like, I can't live anymore, astaghfirullah, that person was giving you life. Allah is Hayyan Qayyum. So this is where we draw the red line. These are the battles we should be fighting. And we say very clearly, that is something that should not be done. Nonetheless, if somebody wants to follow the other madhab, then that's their business. But the other three madhabs, they say it is not sinful to do, and that is the position I hold, and Allah Azza wa Jalla knows best. We move on to the second question for today. Brother Hadi from Sri Lanka emails. Sri Lanka is a beautiful country. Any Sri Lankans in the audience? Any Sri Lankans in the audience? Nobody from Sri Lanka? One of the most beautiful countries I've visited, one of the sweetest people, mashallah. It's a sad tragedy that happened last year, as you know, but otherwise, what a beautiful country it is. But Brother Hadi, mashallah, is watching our shows from Sri Lanka, and he emails, and apparently he had a trip upcoming to China. And now he is saying, what is to be done? That the Islamic rulings on plagues and traveling in light of the coronavirus in China, and also whether we can say that this is a divine punishment from Allah because of what is happening to our Uyghur brothers and sisters. This is the question about the ruling on plagues, traveling to and from plagues, and whether we can say that it is a divine punishment because of what they are doing. So we begin by stating that Aisha radiallahu anha asked the Prophet ﷺ about plagues. She asked the Prophet ﷺ about plagues, and the Prophet ﷺ said that plagues are a punishment that Allah sends to whomever He pleases, and Allah has made it a means of mercy for the believers. It is a punishment to some and a mercy for the others who believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That no one stays at a place of plague and expects Allah to reward him and knows that nothing will happen except what Allah has decreed, except that he shall get the reward of a shaheed. This is in Sahih Bukhari. And the Prophet ﷺ said, hadith is muttafaq alayh, Bukhari and Muslim, the plague is considered a shahada for every believer. So the plague is a mechanism for shahada. And also in Sahih Bukhari, the famous incident that Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anh was on his way to Syria. And Abu Ubaidah, Amir ibn al-Jarrah, met him on his way back. And there was a plague in that land. And Abu Ubaidah said to him, I have just come from Syria, and there is a plague. People are dying. This is a plague that is called the Ta'un of Amwas. In the 18th year of the Hijrah, there was a massive plague that killed over 1,000 Sahaba. And that is why to this day, all across Jordan, all across Palestine, there are graves of the Sahaba, most of them from the plague in this year. So there was a massive plague and the people dying and whatnot. So Abu Ubaidah comes back and says that there is a plague over there and you're going in. Why are you going in? So Umar ibn Khattab said, call for me the Muhajirun. So all the Muhajirun came. And he asked them, what do you think we should do? And they differed amongst themselves. Some of them said, we came for a purpose to fight the Romans, we should go in. And the others said, no, we're outside, let's go back over there. And he then said that, okay, you guys leave, call the Ansar. So he called the Ansar, and the Ansar as well divided amongst themselves. They couldn't unite. Each one is, half is saying go, half is saying come back. So he said, okay, you guys go. Then he said, bring for me the elders of the Quraysh from those who migrated from before the Fatah, the crème de la crème. Bring me the senior of the Sahaba. Bring me the Muhajirun of the original, before the conquest, and the elders amongst them. So then a small group came, and all of them agreed that they should not enter the land. All of them agreed that we should go back. And so Umar ibn al-Khattab then announced to the people that we will be returning after Salat al-Dhuhr. After Salat al-Dhuhr, we're going to pray and then we're going to go back to Medina. We're not going to enter the land. The plague is in the land. We haven't come there. We're going to go back. Abu Ubaidah became frustrated. He said, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, that are you running away from the qadr of Allah? This is a famous phrase. Are you running away from the qadr of Allah? He responded, we are running from the qadr of Allah to the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is all Allah's qadr. Okay, we are running from the qadr of Allah to the qadr of Allah. And then he gave another example as well. Then Abdurrahman ibn Auf was away on a journey or something. He came back and he said, I have something you should all hear. I heard the Prophet ﷺ say, the hadith is in Bukhari and Muslim, I heard the Prophet ﷺ say, if the plague comes in a land where you reside, do not exit fleeing from the plague. And if the plague comes in another land, do not enter that land. And so he brought an evidence that is explicit. And Umar ibn Khattab thanked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for being guided to the truth before he even heard the explicit evidence for this. Now, by the way, this incident is so profound. So many things can be derived. Of them, the true leader always does shura. Of them, no matter how great the Sahaba were, their opinions are not divine. All the Muhajirun are divided, all the Ansar are divided. Of them, yes, seniority and wisdom plays a role here. That's why I said, Mashikhatul Quraysh, the elders, youngsters are very impetuous. Youngsters want to do things rashly, like the Battle of Uhud. They were the ones, yeah, let's go, yeah, let's do that. They want to have a confrontation. And so when the youngsters are there, half of them are saying, let's go in, why are we running away? And as I said many times, life teaches you what books and lectures will not teach you. Going through life will teach you what books and lectures will not. And the impetuousness and rashness, which is a common trait of youth, not just of Muslim, of all youth, it tempers down, you get wisdom. So the elders said, we're not there, the problem's over there, why can't we go? Use common sense, and then the evidence arrives, and the evidence is quite explicit in this regard. So from these evidences, pretty much all the ummah is pretty much clear in this. Ibn Hajar summarizes it, and he says that the one who leaves a plague-infested town running away from the plague, this is sinful in the eyes of Allah. That it is haram if the plague infects your town and you leave because you are scared of the plague. Then he says, and there is ikhtilaf if you already had a journey planned and you're going for another reason. there is ikhtilaf, and it goes back to your niyyah. So suppose there was a journey, you already had it planned, the plague is just beginning, can you leave or not? Fiqh-wise, there's an ikhtilaf on this issue, but in our times, there is no problem when we delegate this authority to the World Health Organizations, to governments that understand, and the Sharia would give governments the right to do crowd control if it is done based on the overall benefit to humanity. In other words, it is Shari'i-wise very easily justifiable that the government clamps down on a neighborhood or in a city, even if some people are not sick. And they say, I'm not sick right now. And until the government does a test and want to say, no, we are going to basically have you all in a complete contained situation. Why? Because in the Sharia, the greater harm is not done if there's a smaller harm that can be done instead. We choose the lesser of two evils. If there's a contained virus versus an uncontained virus, the Sharia will say, contain the virus. So to contain groups of people for this is completely permissible. Now, our scholars also mention this applies when there is a plague. And a plague, we know what it is. It is some type of virus and disease like the Black Death, like the Spanish influenza that took place 100 years ago, like what we see now of the coronavirus, where we don't even have the cure and it just spreads instantaneously and people fall sick and die. This is a plague. This does not apply if it's not a plague-like sickness, if it's a curable sickness, if it's something to do with the atmosphere. So somebody suffers from asthma and you move to a place that has a high pollen count, right? And you're saying, oh, I need to run away. Nobody should come and say, astaghfirullah, the Prophet said, don't flee. No, he didn't say, don't flee from asthma. It is completely permissible to move from location to location because of your health, because of health issues. And in fact, Imam al-Bukhari has a chapter heading that shows his fiqh. Right after mentioning don't run from the plague, the next chapter heading, the permissibility of moving location to location if it is a disease other than a plague. Then he quotes the famous hadith of the Uraniyin. A group of people came to Medina and the climate of Medina did not suit them. So the Prophet told them to go outside the city and stay there. So because it was moist and humid and these are desert, so they were falling sick. So he allowed them to move based upon climate. Obviously, this is completely halal. So, first part of the question, you should not enter this city, generally speaking, unless there is a need that you are helping the people there and you are doing something, in this case, with the permission of the authorities, then it would be permitted. Otherwise, the general rule, when you're in a situation of plague and your locality, you do not exit, and when you're outside, you do not come in. And this is almost pretty much unanimous. The other point that our brother asked is that, is it permissible to say this is a divine punishment? And the response to this is that the hadith is very clear. Any calamity, especially a plague, is a punishment to some and a mercy to others. This is very clear. It is incorrect to extrapolate and say this is a punishment to everybody, because the hadith is very clear. Also, a punishment for sins to certain people, no problem. But for anyone else to specify because of this sin, how do you know? You are now speaking on behalf of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We do not specify. We are very, very irritated and angry at what is happening to our Uyghur brothers and sisters. We know that that government is a tyrannical government. We know that it is now going down a path of Nazi fascism. Since World War II, we have not seen this large-scale concentration camps as we now see in the East Turkestan province. And it is very ironic that we are currently celebrating the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz and Dachau. It is very, very ironic that our government just gave $10 million to Never Again. It is bitterly ironic that our president is standing with the president of Israel, giving more and more concessions to the Israelis against the Palestinians, all the time saying, never again, we're never going to allow this to happen, we've learned our lesson. And right under our noses, the whole world knows what is going on in China and even what is going on to the Palestinians. So we have to say very clearly that it appears there seems to be two justice systems and two different rules by how people are judged, and not all bloods are equal in their eyes. This seems very clear as well. Nonetheless, our anger at the Chinese government and what it is doing does not allow us to go beyond what is right. Allah says in the Quran, this is explicit, لا يجرمنكم شنآن قوم على ألا تعدلوا اعدلوا هو أقرب للتقوى. Do not allow the hatred of a group of people to cause you to act unjustly. Act justly even with your enemies. That is the essence of taqwa. This is in the Quran. We are angry at what the government is doing, yet we do not say that the whole city of Wuhan has been put under threat of Allah and punishment of Allah because of this. How do we know? By the way, maybe it is, but maybe not. It's not my business to say. All that we can say, any calamity could be a means of punishment. And yes, when a sin is public, then generally speaking, it is true, generically speaking, that it is possible that Allah's adab comes, but we never generalize to everybody, because there are innocent people there, and there are people that have nothing to do with the crime, and we cannot just say all of them are evil and going to Jahannam. It's not their fault what is going on. This is the opportunity to, in this dunya, be compassionate, send any aid if possible, and in a religious perspective, give da'wah. And there are Muslims in that city, by the way. There are graduate students studying in that city. There are local Chinese Muslims in that city as well. It's not as if we have to strip ourselves of our complete humanity. There are people that are suffering that don't deserve to suffer, and it will be, insha'Allah ta'ala, a means of rahmah for them. It is not adab for them. There are people upon whom this is not adab, but rather a rahmah. So we do not generalize and say that all of them are suffering. And also, there's an element that I saw myself very clearly online. Some Muslims seem to be happy that this is happening. And we do not take happiness in the pain and suffering of innocent people. These people were not the ones who put the Muslims in prison. These people are average human beings. Would you like it? And by the way, the same justification is used when this country is attacked by the crazies, by the radicals. And they say, all you guys are guilty. All you guys are evil. They use the same justification. We don't like it then. No, not everybody is guilty. We live in this land. We can speak. So then why are we applying it over there? Why are we having a double standard? We know the reality that our government can do some very evil things, but not all the people are evil. We know this reality, that foreign policy can kill 1 million people in Iraq and not bat an eyelid. Go and do Afghanistan. Guantanamo is still operating right now as we speak. 20 years almost have gone by, and there are still over 50 people being tortured worse than dogs in our local neighborhood would ever be done. If that is done to a dog, they would call in the RSPCA and call the police, and the Society for the Cruelty of Animals would come in. So we can call something injustice, and we are living in that society. If somebody else were to gloat that, the hurricane came to Dallas and so many people's property was damaged, they'd be happy at this. Would you like this? So then why do we allow some Muslims to do the same to what is happening in China? It's our job to teach them. No, we don't gloat. These are innocent people. Even if they're non-Muslim, we ask Allah to guide them, but we don't gloat at a tragedy happening to them. And there are also Muslims over there. So the bottom line, yes, it is true. Allah says in the Quran, any evil that happens to you is because of what you have done. But then what does Allah say? وَيَعْفُوا عَنْ كَثِيرٍ. Allah can also forgive because of this. Now is the time to be compassionate, to help them out, and to give them da'wah as well. They turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and those who do so, this will be a means of rahmah for them, not a means of adab. And with that, inshallah ta'ala, we'll conclude for today, and I'll see you tomorrow for our class, inshallah, about the Qiyamah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.